A Bible left at a murder scene, message or misdirection? Welcome to Midnight Radio Drama. I am your host, Wilfred. Tell me where you're tuning in from. Your comments bring this mystery to life. I can't wait to read them. Let's begin. The morning of the Flaxborough annual flower show dawned with the sort of mild, unremarkable brightness that was rather fitting for a town as accustomed to quiet routines as this one. The sky, a pale wash of grey-blue, promised neither rain nor heat, just the steady, indecisive weather typical of early June. In the well-tended gardens behind the town hall, clusters of begonias and dahlias bloomed dutifully, their colours muted under the uncertain light. Flaxborough's flower show was, as usual, a modest affair, drawing a crowd chiefly composed of those who preferred their excitement served with a side of chamomile and mild curiosity. There was Mrs. Furnaby, the reigning queen of the petunias, who inspected the entrance with a critical eye sharpened by years of horticultural disappointment. Mr. Maloney, whose chrysanthemums always looked as if they'd survived a minor war, and the inevitable parade of local councillors who spent more time discussing the allotments than the exhibits. Into this calm bustle stepped Inspector Purbright, a man whose very presence suggested something more measured than the usual police sirens and shouting. Purbright was not one for dramatics. His approach to crime was more akin to tending a delicate plant, patient, observant, and carefully pruning away the extraneous until the root cause revealed itself. On this occasion, however, the routine was to be disrupted, though not with the expected bang of violence or theft. No, the disturbance came in a quieter, more unsettling form. A body found slumped against the venerable old oak that stood sentinel at the far end of the showground, with a well-worn Bible resting conspicuously on his chest. The dead man was Mr. Albert Stokes, a rather nondescript figure in Flaxborough life. Known to most only as the proprietor of the town's modest bookshop, he had long carried a reputation for being solitary, perhaps a little dour. His face, pale and still under the soft morning light, was marked with the faintest traces of a smile, or perhaps a grimace, that defied easy interpretation. The gathering crowd murmured with a mixture of shock and fascination. Some whispered of accidents, others of foul play, but above all, the Bible seemed to provoke a peculiar kind of speculation. Why, in the midst of a flower show being a celebration of life and growth, should a man be found dead, clutching a symbol of faith and salvation? Inspector Purbright, standing just a few paces away with hands folded behind his back, listened quietly as the local constable, Sergeant Hedges, gave his initial report. There were no signs of violence on the body, no apparent wounds, no immediate explanation beyond the enigmatic Bible. "What's the time of death, Sergeant?" Purbright asked gently. "Judging by the stiffness and colour, sir, I'd say sometime late last night or early this morning. No one saw anything suspicious, at least not yet." Purbright nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd and the flower displays beyond. His mind was already piecing together fragments: the solitary bookshop owner, the Bible, the unremarkable setting, the unusual timing. This was not a crime that would shout its story at him. It would whisper, in tones hushed and layered, and he would have to listen carefully indeed. As the flower show went on around them, the town of Flaxborough found itself holding its breath, caught between the familiar bloom of summer and the unsettling shadow cast by the dead man beneath the old oak. And so the first thread of the mystery was laid, as delicate and strange as the petals strewn on the grass. The afternoon sun, hesitant as ever to commit to brightness, filtered through the lace of leaves above the showground, casting a dappled pattern on the grass where Mr. Albert Stokes had been found. Inspector Purbright, having exchanged a few quiet words with Sergeant Hedges and made a polite but firm request to keep the gathering crowd at bay, now turned his attention to the flower beds and the people who circled them like bees drawn to pollen. Only here, the buzz was of whispered conjecture rather than industry. The townsfolk of Flaxborough had a habit of absorbing unusual events into their daily lives, as if they were mere ripples on the surface of a tranquil pond, but beneath, currents always ran deep and tangled. It was clear to Purbright that the news of Mr. Stokes's death was already filtering through the layers of local society, with a variety of inflections, each shaped by personal bias or hope. Mrs. Furnaby, resplendent in her carefully starched hat, approached with the deliberate gait of one used to commanding respect in the horticultural arena. "Such a tragedy, Inspector. Poor Mr. Stokes, always a quiet man, but never unkind. One wonders what secrets he might have kept." Her tone was soft, but there was a flicker in her eye that suggested she knew more than she cared to admit. Purbright inclined his head politely, not pressing for immediate disclosure. The social dance of Flaxborough was as much about what was left unsaid as what was spoken aloud. He made a mental note to call on Mrs. Furnaby later, when the garden tools and prizes had been put away. Nearby, Mr. Maloney, the chrysanthemum specialist, whose plants bore the scars of neglect more than care, leaned conspiratorially toward a cluster of interested listeners. "I'll wager it wasn't natural causes," he murmured, low enough that only those closest could hear. "There's something about that Bible left on his chest, like a message." "A message?" echoed Mrs. Barford, the postmistress, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what? Mr. Stokes wasn't known for preaching or proselytizing." "Quite the opposite, if you ask me." Purbright observed them, noting the variations in their interpretations. The Bible, old, leather-bound and well-thumbed, was indeed an odd token for a man who had, as far as anyone knew, been a modest bookseller more interested in fiction and mystery than in scripture. The juxtaposition set Purbright's mind to wandering along possibilities that lay beyond the obvious. He moved toward the edge of the show ground, where the oak tree stood tall, its broad branches spreading like an umbrella over the patch of disturbed grass beneath. A few yellow petals lay scattered where the body had been, an accidental reminder of the day's intended celebration. The Bible rested nearby on a small wooden bench, placed there carefully by the officers. Sergeant Hedges, looking both troubled and slightly out of his depth, joined Purbright. "We've taken the Bible to the station for a closer look, sir. Nothing obviously suspicious so far. No notes, no markings." "Good," said Purbright. "We will need to examine it carefully later, but the absence of markings is itself a clue of sorts. Mr. Stokes, whoever left that there, wanted the book to speak for itself." Hedges nodded, glancing once more at the gathering crowd, whose murmurs now included more speculative gossip and less polite condolences. Purbright's next step was clear: talk to those who had last seen Albert Stokes alive. The bookshop, situated on a narrow street near the market square, was a place of quiet refuge for readers, and a repository of town gossip by proxy. If anyone could provide an account of Mr. Stokes's recent behaviour, it would be those who frequented the shop or worked nearby. Arriving at the bookshop just after midday, Purbright was greeted by a bell's soft tinkle and a faint scent of aged paper and dust, a comforting, if slightly melancholic, aroma. Behind the counter stood Miss Edith Grant, a young woman employed part-time as shop assistant. Her expression was pale and her hands trembled slightly as she wiped a counter that needed no cleaning. "Inspector," she said, in a voice that was more breath than word, "I didn't expect to see you so soon. I'm sorry to bring trouble to your doorstep, Miss Grant, but I need to understand what Mr. Stokes was like in the days before his death." She nodded, swallowing. "Of course. He was quiet, more so than usual this week. He closed the shop earlier than normal yesterday, which was odd. He didn't say why, just seemed tired. Did he mention anyone? Any visitors, callers, unusual deliveries? Edith hesitated. Well, there was one gentleman, Mr. Harrowby. He's a regular customer, but lately they seemed to argue quietly about something. I couldn't hear the details, but Mr. Stokes looked upset afterward. Mr. Harrowby, and what does he buy? Mostly history books, but their conversation didn't seem about books. Purbright made a note to find Mr. Harrowby. The hint of a dispute, however private, was the sort of thing that might explain small fissures beneath the surface. Anything else? Anything at all unusual? Edith glanced nervously toward the rear of the shop. There was a letter, delivered just this morning. Before the show, Mr. Stokes opened it in the back room and looked very startled. I didn't dare ask. The mention of the letter intrigued Purbright. The timing was suspiciously close to the discovery of the body. Do you still have that letter? I don't know. I think it might be on his desk in the back. Purbright nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Miss Grant. Please leave it just as it is for now. He left the shop with a mind alive with possibilities. If Mr. Stokes had received a letter that unsettled him so, it could be the key to the mystery. Yet the letter alone could not explain the Bible or the setting of the death. Outside, the streets of Flaxborough carried on with their usual hum of activity, though more eyes now turned toward the bookshop and the flower show. Flaxborough was a town that prided itself on maintaining appearances, where the façade of civility often masked a complex web of grudges, rivalries, and quiet resentments. At the market square, Purbright spotted a familiar figure, Councillor Elspeth Harding, whose sharp gaze and polished demeanour made her both respected and feared. She was speaking animatedly to Mr. Jolliffe, the town clerk, who seemed to nod along with an air of resigned patience. Purbright approached them, exchanging courteous greetings. "Inspector," said Mrs. Harding crisply, "we're all most distressed by this dreadful event. It casts an unfortunate shadow over what should be a joyous day." "Yes, indeed," said Purbright. "I gather the council is concerned about the impact on the town's reputation." "Of course," said Mr. Jolliffe. "Flaxborough depends on its image as a peaceful, respectable market town. Any hint of scandal, especially involving a respected shopkeeper, must be handled delicately." Purbright's lips twitched in an almost imperceptible smile. "I'm sure you appreciate that the truth must guide us, not merely the desire for appearances." Mrs. Harding's smile was thin and polite. "Naturally, though one hopes the truth will be as straightforward as possible." The inspector bowed slightly and made his way back toward the showground, his thoughts a tangle of half-spoken fears and subtle contradictions. The case was not straightforward, and each person he met seemed to carry a piece of the puzzle, or a distraction from it. As dusk crept in, painting the sky with hues of mauve and grey, Purbright returned to the station to examine the Bible and the letter from the bookshop. The Bible was a well-worn King James edition, its pages dog-eared and softened by age. Inside, between the delicate pages, Purbright found a pressed flower, a small, faded violet. He looked at it thoughtfully. A violet was a flower often associated with modesty and faithfulness, but it was also a flower that could be found wild in the hedgerows surrounding Flaxborough. Was it a message, a symbol, or simply a forgotten keepsake? Turning his attention to the letter, Purbright carefully unfolded the thin paper. The handwriting was neat but hurried, and the words beneath it carried a tone that was quietly menacing rather than overtly threatening. "Albert, you cannot continue to ignore what we discussed. The past has a way of catching up, and forgiveness is not yours to give. Meet me where the oak shadows fall and come prepared to answer for what you have done." Purbright folded the letter with care, a faint crease marking the ominous message. The reference to the oak was clear. The same tree beneath which Albert Stokes had been found. The inspector sat back, steepling his fingers and letting the weight of the message settle. The case was no longer a question of accident or illness. It had become a matter of human reckoning, cloaked in the quiet rituals of a town that valued propriety above all else. Tomorrow he would begin the slow process of unraveling the tangled threads that had led to this strange and solemn scene. For now, though, the flowers continued to bloom, indifferent to the shadows lengthening beneath the oak. The morning following the flower show was a study in Flaxborough's unhurried rhythms, but beneath its calm veneer, something was quietly shifting. Inspector Purbright arrived at the bookshop promptly at 9, the chill of early June still lingering in the air. The streets had resumed their usual bustle, with shopkeepers opening windows and sweeping doorsteps, but an undercurrent of hushed speculation wove through conversations like a half-remembered tune. Inside the bookshop, Miss Edith Grant was already at her desk, eyes red-rimmed from restless sleep. Her pale face betrayed the strain of recent events, yet she maintained a composed politeness as Purbright entered. "Good morning, Miss Grant," he said softly. "I hope you managed some rest." She nodded, though the effort was visible. "Thank you, Inspector. It's all very unsettling." Purbright gestured toward the back room. "I would like to see Mr. Stokes's desk, please." She led him through narrow aisles of books to a small, cluttered chamber where the late proprietor had spent much of his time. Papers were stacked in uneven piles. A pair of reading glasses lay abandoned atop a faded photograph of a younger Albert Stokes with a woman whose face was partially obscured. Purbright scanned the desk, then pointed to an open ledger with notes in neat, tight script. "Did Mr. Stokes keep this meticulously?" "Oh, yes," Edith replied. "He was particular about his accounts. Nothing unusual there as far as I can tell." The inspector's gaze settled on a small calendar page pinned to the corkboard. A circle drawn in red ink around the previous Thursday, with a terse note beside it. Meeting, the Oak. He folded the note away and turned to Edith. Was this meeting planned or a regular occurrence? Edith bit her lip. "I don't know. I only found the note after his death. He never mentioned it." Purbright made a mental note. The phrase, "the oak," the very spot where the body had been found, was too pointed to be coincidental. As he continued, the doorbell tinkled softly, and a man entered. Tall, somewhat gaunt, with a clipped moustache and sharp eyes that flicked nervously around before settling on Purbright. The man's appearance suggested someone accustomed to precision and control, yet there was an undercurrent of unease in his posture. "Inspector Purbright?" he inquired, voice careful but measured. "Yes." "You must be Mr. Harrowby." "Indeed." "I come at the request of the council," he said smoothly, producing a letter of introduction. "I am here to assist with the inquiry into Mr. Stokes's death." Purbright nodded. "Very well, Mr. Harrowby. Miss Grant mentioned you had a recent disagreement with Mr. Stokes." Harrowby's eyes narrowed slightly. "We discussed matters of local history. Mr. Stokes had opinions that clashed with mine. And what opinions might those have been? Disputes over the provenance of certain manuscripts, minor scholarly disagreements," he said, but the twitch at the corner of his mouth suggested deeper irritation. Purbright allowed the silence to stretch, then shifted gently. "Do you know anything about the letter Mr. Stokes received?" Harrowby's gaze flicked to Edith before returning to Purbright. "I was unaware of any letter." "Did you attend the meeting at the Oak?" Purbright asked. "No," Harrowby replied promptly. "Nor did I know of it until after the fact." There was something rehearsed in his answers, but Purbright withheld judgment. The inspection was only beginning. With Mr. Harrowby's departure, Purbright turned his attention to the letter again. He had requested a copy be made and sent for handwriting analysis, though he suspected the neat script was known in the town. More pressing was the tone, an unmistakable hint of a reckoning long overdue. Leaving the bookshop, Purbright decided to visit the old oak itself. The tree, ancient and knotted, seemed almost to loom over the town as a silent witness to generations of secrets. The ground beneath was cordoned off, but Purbright walked along its edge, his eyes catching on the faint imprint of a footprint in the soft earth. A small, muddy shoe print, partially obscured by crushed petals. A trivial detail, perhaps, but one that would not escape his attention. Nearby, Mrs. Furnaby was tending her prize dahlias, though her hands trembled slightly as she knelt. "Inspector," she said, without looking up, "this whole affair is terribly unsettling. Albert was a strange man, yes, but harmless." "Did he have any enemies, to your knowledge?" Purbright asked. She paused, fingers tightening around a stem. "Enemies?" "No, but there were disagreements. Town council meetings, allotments disputes, the usual grumblings. But nothing that would lead to this." Her eyes flicked toward the oak. "Sometimes even the quietest among us have shadows we don't see." Purbright found this to be a fitting sentiment and continued his rounds. By midday, the town hall was abuzz with murmurs, councillors gathering for an impromptu meeting. Purbright entered to find Mrs. Harding presiding, her tone brisk and controlled. "Inspector," she began, "this event is causing quite the stir. The press has already hinted at scandal, and the council demands swift clarity." Purbright, careful to remain neutral, replied, "The investigation must proceed methodically. Rumour is rarely a reliable guide." "Still," Mrs. Harding said, "Flaxborough cannot afford unrest or damage to its reputation." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Purbright cleared his throat. "I understand, but haste can obscure truth. I ask only for patience and cooperation." After the meeting, Purbright found a quiet corner to review his notes. The letter, the meeting at the Oak, the disputatious scholar Harrowby, and the curious footprint all formed a mosaic of clues. The afternoon brought a visit from Sergeant Hedges, who carried news from the laboratory. "Sir, the letter's handwriting matches that of one Thomas Jolliffe, the town clerk." Purbright raised an eyebrow. "The same Mr. Jolliffe who was at the meeting earlier?" "Indeed." This revelation added a new dimension to the inquiry. The town clerk, a man whose steady presence was a fixture of Flaxborough's civic life, was suddenly connected to a threatening letter. Purbright knew the value of social ties in a small town, and how these ties might fray when pressed. Seeking discretion, Purbright arranged to meet Mr. Jolliffe at the council offices later that day. The clerk arrived punctually, his expression composed but eyes wary. "Mr. Jolliffe," Purbright began, "I understand you authored the letter sent to Mr. Stokes." "Yes," Jolliffe admitted, "though I prefer to think of it as a request for a meeting. There are matters concerning the town's records that Mr. Stokes threatened to expose." "Records? What sort of matters?" Jolliffe's hands folded tightly on the desk. "Some documents in the archives suggest irregularities in council decisions from years ago. Mr. Stokes believed the town had reasons to be concerned." "And this meeting at the Oak, was it meant to resolve these concerns?" "In a manner of speaking. I hope to persuade Mr. Stokes to desist, or at least to temper his intentions." Purbright nodded slowly. "Did you anticipate that meeting might result in harm?" "No," Jolliffe said quickly. "I assure you no one wished Albert harm. The town's peace is paramount." The inspector's thoughts drifted to the Bible, the flower pressed between its pages and the footprints in the soft earth. As dusk fell once more, Purbright returned to his office. He sat back, pondering the intricate dance of motives and secrets in Flaxborough. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the picture remained elusive. In this town of modest façades and private grievances, truth was often a matter of careful listening, and even more careful silence. The case of the murderer who left a Bible was just beginning to reveal its many layers. The morning mist still clung to Flaxborough's narrow streets when Inspector Purbright set out once more, his mind weighing the day ahead. The tangled threads of Albert Stokes's death had begun to form a pattern, but one obscured by the delicate veils of propriety and pretense that so firmly wrapped the town's everyday life. Purbright's first visit was to the town clerk, Thomas Jolliffe's modest home on Victoria Road. The neat brick façade, framed by a carefully tended rosebush, suggested a man who valued order and appearance, much like Flaxborough itself. Purbright knew that beneath such surfaces, however, lay complexities best uncovered with patience and tact. Jolliffe greeted him with the practiced civility of a man accustomed to authority, though a shadow flickered behind his eyes. "Inspector, what can I do for you?" "Mr. Jolliffe, and I wish to understand more about your concerns regarding the town's records," Purbright began, stepping inside. "You mentioned irregularities. Could you be more specific?" Jolliffe led him into a sitting room lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes and binders. "Years ago," he explained, "some decisions were made that, while perhaps expedient at the time, now appear questionable. There were grants issued, land leases arranged, matters that, if scrutinized, might damage reputations. Do you think Mr. Stokes discovered something substantial?" Jolliffe sighed. "Possibly. He was a meticulous man and had access to documents I believed long forgotten." "And did you try to dissuade him from pursuing these matters?" "Yes, at the meeting by the oak tree. I hoped to appeal to his sense of discretion." Purbright regarded him quietly, noting the faint tremor in Jolliffe's voice. "Did anyone else know about this meeting?" "Only a few, including Councillor Harding." That name stirred a faint recollection. Flaxborough's council was a web of alliances and rivalries, and Mrs. Harding's keen mind and steely temperament made her a formidable figure. After leaving Jolliffe's home, Purbright made his way to the council chambers, where the day's business was underway. Councillor Harding sat at the head of the long table, presiding with customary authority. "Inspector Purbright," she said upon seeing him enter, "I trust the investigation is progressing." "It is, Mrs. Harding. I would like to discuss the town records with you." She inclined her head. "Of course. Follow me." In a small private office, Harding produced a folder marked "Confidential." She flipped it open to reveal a series of documents, maps and letters, faded but legible. Some of these leases were arranged in ways that benefited certain individuals over the community. "There has been talk of reclaiming those lands," she explained, voice low. Mr. Stokes feared that exposing this would cause a scandal. "Did he intend to take this to the press?" Purbright asked. "Not that I know. His intention seemed to be to negotiate quietly, perhaps to bring about reform." "And what of your own position in all this?" Harding's eyes flickered, but she remained composed. "I am but one member of the council. These matters are complex." Purbright sensed layers beneath her words, the careful diplomacy of a woman who navigated a town's political waters as deftly as she tended a delicate flower. The inspector left the council chambers with a clearer picture, but also more questions. The town's surface of civility concealed currents of ambition and fear, all swirling around the quiet figure of Albert Stokes. His next stop was the local cafe where gossip was brewed as robustly as the morning tea. The cafe was a modest establishment run by Mrs. Lester, a sharp-eyed woman with a penchant for details. "Morning, Inspector," she greeted him. "Word's out about poor Albert. Strange business, that Bible and all. Have you heard anything that might help?" Mrs. Lester leaned in, lowering her voice. "There's talk of an argument between Mr. Stokes and a newcomer to town, a Mr. Geoffrey Rook. He's been asking questions about the council's dealings, too." Purbright raised an eyebrow. "Rook? I've not met him." "He arrived a few weeks back. Says he's a journalist interested in local history, but some folks find him a bit nosy." That was a lead worth pursuing. As the day wore on, Purbright sought out Mr. Rook at the modest boarding house where he was staying. The man was younger than Purbright expected, with keen eyes and an air of restless energy. "I'm investigating the Stokes case," Purbright said plainly. Rook nodded. "I'm aware. I had a few conversations with Albert. He was concerned about the council's records, and so was I. There's more going on here than meets the eye." "Did you have a falling out?" Rook smiled thinly. "No, but Albert was cautious. He didn't trust easily." "Do you know about the meeting by the oak?" "Yes," Rook admitted. "Albert asked me to come, but I was out of town." Purbright considered this carefully. The gathering had included Jolliffe, Harding, and Stokes, but not Rook. The exclusion suggested political manoeuvring. Returning to his office, Purbright reviewed his notes. The letter from Jolliffe had been a summons, but the meeting's outcome remained unclear. The Bible's presence was still unexplained, and the small violet pressed inside it beckoned with silent meaning. Later, Edith Grant called with news. A visitor had come by the bookshop, asking about the Bible. She described a middle-aged woman with sharp features and a purposeful stride. "Do you know who she was?" Purbright asked. "No," Edith replied, "but she seemed very interested." This stranger's appearance was an unexpected twist. The inspector arranged to meet with Mrs. Furnaby again that evening. As they walked through the fading light of the show gardens, she spoke quietly. "Albert confided in me once about a long-held secret, something from his past that he feared might resurface." "What sort of secret?" Purbright asked. She shook her head. "I don't know, only that it involved the Bible." The significance deepened. Back at the station, Purbright pieced together a timeline. Albert Stokes, a man burdened by knowledge of questionable council dealings, threatened by the town clerk seeking quiet resolution. A meeting at the Oak that was meant to negotiate peace. The Bible, possibly a symbol or message, pressed with a violet, modesty, faithfulness, but also hidden sorrow. Who had delivered the fatal blow? Was it the council, protecting their interests? Or a stranger bringing an old grievance to bear? Or perhaps the truth lay deeper still, in the silent stories that towns like Flaxborough so carefully concealed. As the night deepened, Purbright allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Justice in Flaxborough was less about spectacle and more about subtlety, less about loud accusations and more about whispered truths. And so the dance continued, a slow waltz of secrets and silence beneath the fading stars. The following morning broke with the soft promise of rain, the sky a pewter sheet streaked with the occasional silver thread of light. Flaxborough woke to a dampened world, the familiar streets washed clean but somehow subdued, as if the very weather mirrored the mood that clung to the town. Inspector Purbright, stepping into the cool air, felt the weight of the investigation pressing steadily onward, a quiet insistence that refused to relent. His first appointment was with Mrs. Elspeth Harding at her home on Church Lane. The house was an elegant Georgian terrace, restrained in its decor, but full of carefully chosen details, porcelain figurines, framed landscapes, and, curiously, a small, well-kept garden where violets bloomed discreetly beneath the rose bushes. The sight of the flowers arrested Purbright's attention briefly before he was ushered inside by Mrs. Harding herself, whose sharp eyes assessed him with the cool precision of a woman accustomed to negotiation. "Inspector," she said crisply, "I trust you find Flaxborough tolerably peaceful this morning." "As peaceful as one can be with a body beneath an oak," Purbright replied lightly, inclining his head. "Mrs. Harding, I wonder if we might speak candidly about the council's dealings with Mr. Stokes, and particularly about that meeting by the oak." She gestured to a pair of chairs in the drawing-room, settling herself with the practised grace of a chess player considering her next move. "Of course. I am aware the matter weighs heavily on many. May I ask about the significance of those violets in your garden?" Purbright ventured, his tone casual, but pointed. Her eyes flickered briefly to the window. "A modest flower, indeed," she said, "symbolic of faithfulness, if I recall correctly, but I fail to see how that relates to our investigation." "Forgive me," Purbright said, "it is a detail that caught my eye. Given what was found pressed within the Bible on Mr. Stokes, Harding's composure did not falter. Perhaps it was a personal memento, unrelated to any wider affair." Purbright made no further comment, but filed the detail away carefully. Their conversation turned to the minutes of past council meetings, particularly those relating to land leases and financial grants. Harding admitted there had been disagreements, some sharp enough to leave lingering resentments, but insisted all was handled with proper decorum. "Mr. Stokes was a principled man," she said softly, "but his insistence on truth sometimes unsettled the delicate balance we maintain." Purbright noted the emphasis, but remained silent. As he left, the chill of the morning seemed to deepen, the sky now a slate canvas heavy with impending rain. His next visit was to Geoffrey Rook, the journalist who had recently arrived in town. Purbright found him in a cluttered room above a bookshop on Market Street, surrounded by stacks of newspapers and notebooks. Rook greeted him with a nod, his eyes bright with restless energy. "Inspector, how can I assist?" Purbright wasted no time. "I'm keen to understand your interest in Flaxborough's council and your connection with Mr. Stokes." Rook leaned back, hands steepled. "I suspected irregularities before Albert mentioned them. His death was a blow not just to me, but to the truth we seek." "Do you know who might wish to silence that truth?" "Several candidates," Rook replied wryly. "Small towns guard their secrets fiercely." Purbright pressed gently. "Did you have any plans to meet Mr. Stokes on the day he died?" Rook shook his head. Number Y was out of town. "I regret missing the meeting." The conversation was frank, but Rook's restlessness suggested he held more than he let on. Leaving Rook, Purbright walked to the outskirts of town, where the old oak stood solemnly. The ground around it was still cordoned off, and he paused, studying the scene. The faint, muddy footprint remained, now documented by photographs. A faint rustle drew his attention. It was Mrs. Furnaby, who approached quietly, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup. "I thought you might be here," she said softly. "Mrs. Furnaby," Purbright greeted. "Your violets intrigued me. You mentioned Mr. Stokes confided in you once. Might you tell me more?" She sipped the tea before replying. "It was years ago, during a council meeting. Albert revealed he had discovered something that tied the Bible to a secret from the town's past." "A secret?" She nodded. "An old scandal hushed up to protect reputations. The Bible, you see, belonged to a man wronged long ago. Albert had found it in a collection of donated items. He believed the man's story needed telling." Purbright felt a thread tugging at the edges of the case. Did Albert say who the man was? Mrs. Furnaby hesitated. Only that the man was connected to Flaxborough's founding families. Was this secret related to the recent threats he received? Possibly. The letter from Mr. Jolliffe suggested pressure to keep quiet. They stood in silence, the wind stirring the leaves overhead as rain began to patter gently. Back at the station, Purbright summoned Sergeant Hedges. "I want a full check on any archival materials relating to the Bible and the founding families. Also, cross-reference any old scandals that match this time frame." "Yes, sir." Later, Edith Grant arrived, clutching an envelope. "Inspector, this was left for you at the bookshop. No name, just a note. For those who seek the truth." Purbright opened it carefully. Inside was a faded photograph of a stern-looking man holding a similar Bible, alongside a newspaper clipping dated some 50 years prior. The headline read, "Council Scandal Threatens Flaxborough's Esteemed Families." The note inside, written in the same neat hand as the letter to Stokes, read, "The past is never buried. It breathes beneath the oak." Purbright set the documents down, the pieces clicking together. The Bible was not just a symbol of faith, but a talisman of hidden history. The inspector returned his gaze to the window where rain blurred the outlines of the town. The quiet streets of Flaxborough, with their gardens and gossip, were fertile ground for secrets that festered beneath polite surfaces. And beneath the oak, justice awaited its turn. The rain had ceased by morning, leaving Flaxborough washed clean but slick underfoot. Inspector Purbright moved through the quiet streets with a measured pace, his thoughts weighed by the steadily thickening fog of half-truths and veiled resentments. The town appeared unchanged, yet beneath the familiar façades, something had shifted irreversibly. His first call was to the archives housed in the small room above the public library, a modest space cluttered with brittle ledgers, yellowed newspapers, and dusty tomes chronicling the town's history. The archivist, a bespectacled woman named Miss Penelope Cartwright, greeted Purbright with a professional nod. "I understand you're looking for documents related to the founding families and any past scandals involving the council," she inquired. "Yes, Miss Cartwright. Anything that might shed light on the man in this photograph," Purbright said, producing the faded image of the stern-faced gentleman holding the Bible. Penelope adjusted her glasses and gestured to a nearby table. "We do have some records here that might interest you. The Flaxborough Chronicle archives go back well over a century, and the town's darker episodes are documented with varying degrees of discretion. Together they sifted through fragile pages, the weight of history palpable. Purbright's attention settled on a series of articles from the late 1920s, detailing a scandal involving the misuse of town funds by certain members of the council, names that appeared in the current roster, or close relatives thereof. One particular entry stood out: a fiery public inquiry into the mysterious disappearance of a local man, Jonathan Hale, who had been a whistleblower on those misdeeds. The investigation had ended inconclusively, with Hale's body never found, and the case quietly shelved. "This seems relevant," Purbright said thoughtfully. "Jonathan Hale, the Bible in the photo might have belonged to him." Penelope nodded. His family donated many personal items to the town archives years later. It is said the Bible was a symbol of his faith and hope for justice. The puzzle was becoming clearer. Albert Stokes had stumbled upon a long-buried grievance, and it appeared someone in Flaxborough was intent on keeping that history hidden. After the archives, Purbright returned to the council offices to confront Councillor Harding once more. Her expression was guarded, but not uncooperative. "I have read the archives," Purbright began carefully. "The scandal involving Jonathan Hale casts a new light on recent events. Do you recognize the names mentioned? Harding's face tightened imperceptibly. Some of those families remain influential. The past is a sensitive matter. Did Mr. Stokes plan to expose this history? She hesitated. He intended to bring the truth to light in a way that would avoid further harm to the town. And the letter from Mr. Jolliffe? An attempt to broker a private discussion. The council wished to resolve matters quietly. Purbright noted the delicate balancing act. The council sought to preserve its authority while managing the shadows cast by ancestors long gone. Later, a new visitor arrived at the station. Mrs. Agnes Hale, a woman in her 70s with a bearing that combined both strength and sorrow. She claimed to be a distant relative of Jonathan Hale. "I heard of Albert's death and the Bible," she said, clutching a faded handkerchief. "I've long hoped someone would uncover the truth about Jonathan." Purbright offered his condolences and listened as Mrs. Hale recounted family stories, tales of injustice, betrayal, and the silencing of dissent. "Albert was a good man," she said firmly. "He carried that Bible as a sign of hope." Her words reinforced the weight of the case. Back at his office, Purbright reviewed his notes alongside the letter and photograph. The violet pressed in the Bible, the meeting at the oak, the threatened exposure of old secrets. It all pointed to a struggle between the past and the present, between truth and the preservation of a fragile peace. That evening, Purbright met again with Edith Grant, who revealed she had found an envelope hidden in a book recently sold by Albert. Inside was a diary, its pages filled with meticulous entries detailing the man's discoveries and fears. As Purbright read, the diary unfolded the story of a man burdened by knowledge, seeking justice through quiet perseverance. It described his attempts to contact the descendants of Jonathan Hale and his growing apprehension about the threats he had received. The final entry was chillingly vague. "Tomorrow, I will meet them at the oak. I must be ready." Purbright closed the diary thoughtfully, the silence around him profound. Flaxborough's unassuming streets were the stage for a drama of conscience and concealment, and the inspector knew that the coming days would bring revelations, both delicate and decisive. The early morning mist curled around the cobblestones of Flaxborough as Inspector Purbright made his way toward the town's modest railway station. The air was cool, the kind that sharpens the senses and sets the mind to a steady, deliberate pace, fitting for a day that promised more answers and perhaps a few unexpected questions. Purbright's attention was caught by the faint clang of the station bell as a train pulled in, disgorging a handful of passengers onto the platform. Among them was a man whose lean frame and precise manner betrayed a purposeful traveller. He carried a small leather satchel and wore a dark overcoat despite the rising sun. The inspector's suspicions were confirmed when the man approached, extending a hand with a cautious smile. "Inspector Purbright, I presume?" "Geoffrey Rook, Mr. Rook," Purbright acknowledged. "You're a man in no shortage of curiosity. What brings you back to Flaxborough so soon?" Rook's eyes held a glint of urgency. "I've returned with information that might illuminate some of the shadows surrounding Albert Stokes's death." They moved away from the bustle to a quiet corner of the station cafe, where Rook unfolded a worn notebook. Inside were detailed notes, copies of letters and sketches of documents, some bearing official seals. "Mr. Stokes confided in me about a recent discovery," Rook explained. "A ledger, hidden it seems, documenting illicit transactions involving council members. He believed it tied back to the old Jonathan Hale affair." Purbright studied the notes carefully. "And this ledger?" "Missing," Rook admitted. "Disappeared from the archives just days before Albert's death." Purbright felt the familiar stir of determination. "We must find it. The day's inquiries led them back to the town hall, where the council's records were stored. The archivist, Miss Cartwright, appeared uneasy under Purbright's scrutiny. "I'm afraid I cannot account for the ledger," she said carefully. "Some items have gone missing recently. I suspect someone with access." Purbright made a discreet note and shifted his focus to the smaller details: the faint, muddy footprints near the oak, the curious presence of the Bible, and the delicate violet. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Purbright arranged a discreet meeting with Councillor Harding. Their conversation was cordial but layered with unspoken meaning. "Inspector," she said, "Flaxborough is a town of traditions. Some truths, once unearthed, unsettle more than they enlighten." Purbright replied evenly, "And yet without truth, trust cannot endure." Their exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Hedges, who bore news from the forensics lab. "We've identified traces of a rare pollen on the Bible's pages," Hedges reported. "It's from a violet species found only in a particular part of the town's old cemetery." Purbright's interest sharpened. That would suggest the Bible was handled or placed near that location recently. The cemetery was a place of quiet reflection and long-forgotten secrets, the final resting place of many of Flaxborough's founding families, including the Hales. That evening, Purbright visited the cemetery under a waning moon. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. He traced the outlines of weathered gravestones, his eyes searching for a clue that might link the past to the present. Near the Hale family plot, he discovered fresh soil, a recent disturbance. At the base of an ancient oak, a small bundle wrapped in oilskin lay hidden beneath fallen leaves. With care, Purbright retrieved the package. Inside was the missing ledger, its leather cover worn but intact. The pages revealed detailed records of transactions, names of council members, and indications of payments made to silent dissenters, including the elusive Jonathan Hale. As he examined the ledger, footsteps approached. Turning, Purbright saw Mrs. Furnaby, her expression grave but resolute. "You found it?" she said quietly. "Albert wanted the truth brought to light." "Indeed," Purbright replied, "but doing so will stir more than just memories." Mrs. Furnaby nodded. Flaxborough must decide whether to embrace its past or continue hiding behind polite façades. Together they returned the ledger to the station, ready to present its contents to those who would listen. As dawn broke, Purbright felt the delicate balance of justice and discretion weighing upon him. The town's secrets were no longer shadows, but threads woven into its very fabric. And in that weaving, the story of the murder who left a Bible was reaching its inevitable turning point. The sun rose over Flaxborough with a pale gold glow, casting long shadows over the town's neat rows of cottages and the spires of the modest parish church. Yet beneath this genteel morning, a subtle tension hummed in the air, as though the very stones of the place had been disturbed from their accustomed stillness. Inspector Purbright arrived early at the council chambers, where a special meeting had been convened under the uneasy auspices of crisis management. The town clerk, Thomas Jolliffe, sat stiffly at the head of the table, his usual composure replaced by a trace of unease. Councillor Harding was already present, her posture taut but dignified. Purbright noted the quiet murmurs among the assembled councillors and town officials. Some faces pale, others carefully masked in indifferent civility. The ledger, freshly recovered, was now the fulcrum upon which the town's fragile equilibrium rested. "Thank you all for assembling at short notice," Purbright began, his voice measured yet firm. "We are here to address the evidence uncovered concerning the death of Albert Stokes and the troubling implications it carries for Flaxborough." He laid the ledger on the polished oak table, its worn leather cover gleaming dully under the overhead light. This document reveals a history of misappropriations and cover-ups stretching back decades. It also suggests that Mr. Stokes had become a target due to his intent to expose these matters. A low murmur rippled through the room. Jolliffe cleared his throat. "Inspector, while I acknowledge my role in attempting to arrange a meeting with Mr. Stokes, I categorically deny any involvement in his death. The Council's priority has always been the well-being of Flaxborough." Harding nodded in agreement, but her eyes betrayed an unspoken conflict. Purbright fixed Jolliffe with a steady gaze. "The letter you wrote was threatening in tone. How do you justify that?" Jolliffe's face tightened. "It was meant to secure a dialogue, nothing more." "But threats have consequences, Mr. Jolliffe. Did you consider that your letter might have placed Mr. Stokes in danger?" Before Jolliffe could answer, a voice interrupted, sharp and clear. "I think it's time we spoke honestly." All heads turned to the door where Geoffrey Rook stood, the journalist's usual restless energy tempered by solemnity. "I have been digging into the Council's history," Rook said, "and I've uncovered something that changes everything." He pulled a folder from his satchel and laid it beside the ledger. Inside were copies of correspondence implicating certain council members in attempts to suppress the Hale affair years ago, letters that suggested a conspiracy to maintain silence at all costs. "This isn't just about documents," Rook continued. "It's about lives and legacies that have been deliberately obscured." The room fell into a tense silence. Purbright saw the flicker of unease pass over several faces, particularly Mrs. Harding's. "Are you accusing the Council of murder?" she asked coolly. "I am saying that the motives run deeper than mere bureaucracy," Rook replied, "and someone wanted to ensure Albert Stokes never revealed the ledger's secrets." Purbright raised a hand to restore order. "Let us be clear. We have evidence of threats, a meeting gone wrong, and a ledger that reveals wrongdoing. Our task is to identify who crossed the line from silence to violence." He looked around the room. "Mr. Jolliffe, I must ask again, where were you on the evening of the murder?" Jolliffe swallowed visibly. "At home, alone." "Anyone to corroborate that?" "No." The inspector's mind noted the absence of an alibi. "And you, Mrs. Harding?" "I was attending a council fundraiser in Lincolnshire," she said firmly. "Can anyone confirm?" "A handful of attendees can." Rook shifted uneasily in his seat. "I'm not convinced the fundraiser lasted the entire evening." Purbright nodded slowly. "Thank you. We will be following up." The meeting concluded with a resolution to cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation, though the atmosphere was charged with barely concealed suspicion. As the council chambers emptied, Purbright and Rook stepped outside into the freshening breeze. "Things are more tangled than I anticipated," Rook admitted. Purbright considered the emerging picture, a town caught between the shadows of its past and the demands of its future, where loyalty and fear intermingled in subtle, dangerous ways. That evening, Purbright visited the bookshop to speak once more with Edith Grant. She was arranging new stock, but paused when she saw him. "Inspector," she said quietly, "there's something you should see." From beneath the counter she produced a small, worn notebook belonging to Albert Stokes. Its pages were filled with careful observations about the townsfolk, notes on meetings, whispered conversations, and peculiar behaviours. One entry caught Purbright's eye, a detailed account of a late-night visit to the Oak where Stokes had confronted someone. The entry ended abruptly. Edith's voice was hushed. He was close to uncovering the truth, but afraid. Purbright folded the notebook carefully. Fear is a powerful silencer. As he left the shop, the street lamps cast long shadows and the night air felt charged with anticipation. The delicate threads of the case were pulling taut, and the reveal was drawing near. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Flaxborough, casting the market square in a warm, fading light that lent the town an almost nostalgic glow. Yet beneath the gentle hues, an undercurrent of unease permeated the air, as if the very stones awaited the stirring of secrets long buried. Inspector Purbright made his way toward the small community hall where he had arranged a discreet gathering, a carefully orchestrated occasion to test the town's tangled loyalties and coax the truth into daylight. The room was modest, its wooden panels polished but worn, with a scattering of chairs arranged in a loose semicircle. Among those present were Thomas Jolliffe, Councillor Harding, Geoffrey Rooke, Edith Grant, and Mrs. Furnaby, a select assembly drawn from the web of lives enmeshed in the mystery. Each arrived with a guarded expression, aware that beneath Purbright's courteous invitation lay an unspoken challenge. "Thank you all for coming," Purbright began, his tone steady but measured. "This gathering is not a tribunal but a chance to speak plainly. We stand at a crossroads where the truth, long obscured, demands our attention." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Mr. Jolliffe, you have maintained that your letter to Mr. Stokes was a call for dialogue, yet the tone was pointed, and your attempts to deny involvement in his death remain unsubstantiated." Jolliffe shifted uneasily, but met Purbright's gaze. "Inspector, I intended no harm. My actions were driven by concern for the town's stability." "Concern that may have crossed into coercion?" Purbright inquired gently. Before Jolliffe could respond, Mrs. Furnaby interjected, her voice calm but firm. "There is a distinction between protecting the town and protecting oneself." Councillor Harding nodded in assent, but remained silent. Turning to Geoffrey Rooke, Purbright continued, "Mr. Rooke, your investigations have uncovered correspondence suggesting a concerted effort to suppress the Hale affair. What do you make of these documents?" Rooke leaned forward, hands clasped. "They paint a picture of a town willing to sacrifice transparency to preserve its reputation, but such sacrifices carry consequences." Edith Grant's gaze flickered to the assembled group. Albert kept detailed notes of conversations and observations. He was convinced that someone here feared exposure. Purbright produced a folded sheet of paper, one of Stokes's notes, quoting a veiled threat overheard at a council meeting. "The past must remain buried, whatever the cost," he read aloud. The room grew tense. "Inspector," Harding finally spoke, "this is a delicate matter. The council's duty is to the town's welfare. Sometimes difficult choices must be made." Purbright nodded thoughtfully. "And yet when such choices lead to violence, they become untenable." He turned his attention to Jolliffe again. "Where were you on the evening of the murder?" "Home, as I said," Jolliffe replied, voice strained. "Alone?" Jolliffe nodded. "Can anyone verify your whereabouts?" "No." Purbright allowed the silence to linger, then shifted focus. "Mrs. Furnaby, you've been a voice of reason throughout. Is there anything you wish to add?" She hesitated, briefly before speaking. Flaxborough thrives on its reputation, but beneath the surface, resentment simmers. Secrets held tightly often fester into something far more dangerous. "Indeed," Purbright agreed. "That is why it is vital to confront them before more harm is done." The inspector then turned to Rooke. "You mentioned missing documents. Have you noticed any suspicious behavior recently?" Rooke glanced briefly toward Jolliffe before replying, "There have been unusual requests for restricted access to the archives as well as unexplained absences." Purbright made a note to pursue this lead. As the meeting drew to a close, Purbright stood and addressed the group. "This gathering is but one step on the path to clarity. I ask each of you to consider what has been said and to reflect on the part you may play in bringing truth to light. After the attendees departed, Purbright lingered in the quiet hall, contemplating the delicate balance of trust and deception that defined Flaxborough. The game was subtle, the stakes high, and the final move yet to be made. Later that evening, he returned to his office where Sergeant Hedges awaited with a new report. "We've run prints on the muddy footprint near the oak," Hedges began. "They match a pair of boots owned by Mr. Jolliffe." Purbright raised an eyebrow. "That places him at the scene." "Correct, sir. Also a witness report seeing a figure matching his description near the oak late that night." The inspector steepled his fingers, the pieces converging with renewed clarity. "Thank you, Hedges. Keep this confidential for now." As the town of Flaxborough settled into the hush of night, Purbright sat alone, the ledger open before him, the scent of old paper mingling with the soft ticking of the clock. Justice in this quiet town would not be swift or loud, but patient and precise, and soon it would speak. The morning air hung heavy with a damp chill, as if Flaxborough itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Inspector Purbright approached the town hall with a measured step, the ledger clutched firmly under his arm like a testament to the tangled truths he was about to unravel. Today would be the moment to draw the threads together, to test the delicate balance between justice and discretion that the town so desperately required. Inside the council chambers, the assembled group awaited him: Thomas Jolliffe, Councillor Harding, Geoffrey Rooke, Edith Grant, Mrs. Furnaby, and a few other key townsfolk. The atmosphere was taut, the usual polite civility replaced by a quiet tension that only a looming revelation could summon. Purbright began calmly. "Thank you all for coming once more. It is time to address the matter before us, and to lay bare the truth that Albert Stokes sought to reveal." He placed the ledger carefully on the polished table, its worn leather cover a mute witness to decades of secrets. This ledger chronicles a series of transactions and concealments tied to the council's past, a history that implicates more than one individual in acts of deliberate wrongdoing. He looked steadily at Jolliffe. "Your attempts to control the narrative, including the letter you sent Mr. Stokes, have been noted, and the evidence places you at the scene of his death." Jolliffe's face paled, but he straightened, meeting Purbright's gaze, without flinching. "Inspector, I admit to visiting the oak that evening. I intended to speak with Mr. Stokes, to persuade him to reconsider his course." "And did you?" He refused to back down. "Did the encounter escalate?" Jolliffe hesitated. There was a heated exchange. Words were exchanged, sharp and unkind, but I did not kill him. Purbright nodded thoughtfully. "Words can wound, but murder demands action." He turned to Harding. "Councillor, your alibi has been partially verified, yet there remain gaps." She sighed. "My presence at the fundraiser was confirmed, but I left early due to illness." "Who can corroborate your departure?" "Only myself." "And Mr. Rooke?" Rooke's restless gaze met Purbright's. "I have been watching and listening. I believe someone else was involved, someone who stands to gain from the continued silence." Purbright's eyes narrowed. "Do you have a name?" Rooke shook his head. "Not yet. But I suggest a reconsideration of who might have had access to the archives and the ledger." Purbright nodded. "Miss Cartwright's uneasy account of missing documents is telling." He then addressed Edith and Mrs. Furnaby. "You have both been valuable sources of insight. Is there anything more you wish to add?" Edith's voice was soft but resolute. Albert feared a deeper conspiracy involving family secrets and silent complicity. Mrs. Furnaby added, "Flaxborough's reputation has protected many truths, but silence is no longer an option." The room grew still. Purbright unfolded a final card. I have arranged a meeting at the Oak tomorrow evening, the scene where it all began. I invite all of you to attend. It will be a chance to confront what lies beneath the surface, and to bring closure to this matter." The council members exchanged uncertain glances, but no objections were raised. As the meeting adjourned, Purbright felt the tension in the room shift, a collective intake of breath before the plunge. That night he prepared quietly in his office, reviewing the ledger once more and planning the careful orchestration of tomorrow's gathering. The truth, he knew, must be revealed with grace and precision, lest it fracture the fragile harmony of the town. The evening air was crisp and still as Flaxborough's residents gathered beneath the ancient oak, its gnarled branches silhouetted against a twilight sky streaked with fading amber. The quiet solemnity of the moment belied the tension simmering just beneath the surface, as Inspector Purbright took his place among the assembled group: Thomas Jolliffe, Councillor Harding, Geoffrey Rooke, Edith Grant, Mrs. Furnaby, and a smattering of curious onlookers from the town. Purbright began in his usual measured tone. "Thank you all for coming. This oak has borne witness to many moments in Flaxborough's history, and tonight it will witness the unravelling of a tale long kept in shadows." He held up the worn Bible, the violet pressed within its pages, catching the last glints of daylight. Albert Stokes left this as a message, a symbol of faith, modesty, and sorrow. It was linked to a man named Jonathan Hale, whose pursuit of justice many decades ago was cut short by silence, and as it seems, by violence. The inspector's gaze swept the group. "The ledger we uncovered speaks of corrupt transactions, cover-ups, and threats, intended to keep these secrets buried. Mr. Stokes, driven by conscience, sought to expose this, and it cost him his life." He turned slowly toward Jolliffe. "You confronted Mr. Stokes at the Oak, hoping to persuade him to cease his inquiries, but the situation escalated beyond words." Jolliffe's voice was low, but steady. "It was a heated argument. I did not mean to harm him." "Yet your footprints place you at the scene," Purbright said, "and the evidence suggests a struggle." Jolliffe's shoulders sagged, the weight of guilt evident. Purbright continued, addressing Harding and Rooke. "Mrs. Harding, your alibi has gaps, but no direct evidence implicates you. Mr. Rooke, your pursuit of truth has been invaluable, though at times disruptive." He allowed a faint smile. "Flaxborough's peace is delicate, and it must be maintained with care." Turning back to the crowd, Purbright concluded, "This is not merely a tale of crime, but a lesson in the dangers of silence and the costs of protecting façades. The past cannot be rewritten, but it can be acknowledged." As the assembled townsfolk absorbed the gravity of the revelation, Purbright felt the familiar quiet satisfaction that came from peeling back the layers of human complexity, not with force or spectacle, but with patience and subtlety. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Edith approached quietly. "Do you think the town will change?" Purbright regarded the oak, its sturdy branches reaching toward the stars. "Change is inevitable, Miss Grant. Whether it is for better or worse depends on what they choose to do with the truth." Returning to his office, the inspector settled into his chair, the ledger and the Bible resting on his desk. Flaxborough would resume its rhythms, the murmurs of gossip and the carefully curated reputations. But beneath it all, a quiet shift had occurred. The murderer who left a Bible was no longer a shadow in the night, but a catalyst for reckoning.